All right. Well, I think we hit that 11:35 mark. So let's get started. And as people start joining, I'll just go ahead and add them. So welcome to Ask a B Corp Consultant. I'm Adrienne Jones, and I'm the room host for today. And I was one of the folks that helped put this conference together. It's been a real pleasure to be able to put this together for people that are current B Corp leaders, people that are interested in becoming B Corps. It's been really amazing to be able to help the movement in this way. My full-time job is that I'm a learning architect at Adrienne E. Jones, LLC. We're a Portland-based learning experience design firm. While I let a couple of other people in here, I would love to hear from the group. I'm super curious who is here that is a current B Corp that is doing the recertification. So if you're going through recertification, I'd love for you to choose the reaction down at the bottom of your screen that looks like the party celebration. So recertification is a celebration. If you are going through certification for the first time, let's get a heart. And anyone else, you can give us a thumbs up. Awesome, great. We have a couple of people here that are going through the certification for the first time. So that's amazing. Great, one recertification, perfect. Well, lucky for you, we have two amazing B Corp consultants here today. We have Craig Hill and Mike Mercer. They're going to do a quick introduction in just a minute, and then you'll have time to ask your burning questions about becoming, about being, or about recertifying to be a B Corp. And we'll have you put those questions into the chat, and then I'll help moderate them. So start thinking of your questions while Craig and Mike do a quick intro. And Craig and Mike, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Go for it, Craig.
All right, well, my name is Craig Hill. I use he, him pronouns. My full-time job's at B Corp Beneficial State Bank. We were the presenting sponsor yesterday, working in client treasury management. So I get to know several of you on this call actually through the banking world. My cat is also trying to clean himself right in front of me as I'm trying to focus, and that's not working for me. Bye-bye, Bagheera. I'm also have been on the board for the past 5 years of the local PDX. And for the past 4 years, it's been known as the certifications chair. Originally, that was known as recruiting chair. We recognize that recruiting is only part of the B Corp gambit. Really, retention is about certification. So there's both certifications that are new and certifications that are renewed. And especially about 4 years ago, it moved from a 2-year certification model to a 3-year certification model. And that what we saw over that side is actually, that means there's 50% longer certification terms, means there's 50% more turnover at companies during that time for folks who are the stewards or the internal champions of the B Corp certification process from when they initially got certified or did their previous recertification. That means there's just a lot more room for folks to need to learn, to bring folks into the fold, whether it's immediately prior to recertification or saying, oh, hey, we're going to recertify in 9 to 12 months. We should get some folks brought up to speed on this before the process really gets heavy. So I put a lot of those together. We have B101s and some hackathons and other opportunities to get folks connected to certification support, be it paid or unpaid, and just really looking forward to exploring some of that with y'all today.
Great. Thanks, Craig. So Mike Mercer here, also with Craig on the board of B Local PDX, and then my business with Mercer Consulting for the last 6 years or so has been all focused almost purely on helping companies move through the B Corp certification process, and in some cases recertification, and then folks for just their continuous learning process. But one of the things I'm really loving about this session, not just this session, but kind of build it really over the last couple of years has been this more of a focus on kind of social justice and how that, thinking about that is really part of the larger system that we need to be focused on. And that, so much of my background has really been on the environmental side. And I remember early on in my career, when social justice would come up, our CEO would say, oh, that's a distraction for us right now. We really have to focus on saving the planet. And I really appreciate how this, the shift has come where we say, no, we have to think about this as a system. We can't just do one. And if we're not actually solving the other, we're not really getting to the issues that we need to, and not bringing everybody along together. And so this is a continuous learning process for me as well. And so I'm really excited about this session and hearing what your questions are and how we can help answer.
Great. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, Mike. If you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and we can talk those through. Also, if you want to put that question in the chat, that would be great. And I'll just ask one last time as you're thinking of those questions. We'd love to see from folks, what stage of the certification process you're in. So if you can choose the reaction from the bottom of your screen, and if you're going through the certification process to become a B Corp for the first time, give us the heart. If you are going through the recertification, you can give us the celebration icon. And if you're here for some other reason too, go ahead and give us the thumbs up and maybe put in the chat what you're interested in hearing more about with the B Corp movement.
So also, thanks, Adrian. As folks are doing that, maybe just a couple of thoughts to think about in terms of what's going on with certification and recertification with BLab. And I think most folks, not to assume that everybody kind of understands the certification process, and we're probably not going to take the time to go through that whole process now. But really, I think most folks should know that it's the certification. It's a rigorous process, and it's meant to be rigorous. As I think we heard from one of our speakers from Tillamook today, is that it's great to have a third party kind of scorekeeper. And I heard this from one of our clients or one of our local B Corps, Chris King, the other day, Bicycle Parts, and they were saying, hey, somebody tried to call us out on a question on some of our impact, and he was able to kind of turn back to the B Corp certification and kind of some specific data and scoring in there to be able to say, here's what we really are doing. Here's maybe what story you heard from somebody else, but here's what's happening. So it's great to have that. In terms of the scoring process, it's really the scoring threshold is to get at least 80 points in the BIA across 5 core areas: governance, workers, community, environment, and your customers. And your scoring is really around kind of 2 core areas, right? Your operationals, which are your policy practices, those kind of day-to-day things that you're doing. And then on the other side is your IBMs, or the impact business models scores, which are really kind of those that the business was trying to solve a environmental or social problem through your actual business model. Those kinds of things are scored more heavily in the BIA, and it's great to have those when you have them. Couple of things just to think about for folks who are just going through the process right now. I don't think we've actually shared this, but there's been a huge increase. Maybe this, Jorge spoke about this at the beginning yesterday. I think I've heard up to 700% increase in new companies applying for certification. It's pretty significant to see the growth in B Corp. There are 4,000, I think they had 4,000 new companies apply this last year during the midst of a pandemic, which is pretty wild. What that's created is a big backlog, and BLab is doing the best they can to move through it. But just know that it used to be 5 to 6 months for certification for a new company. Now it's up to a year or a little bit longer. They're working on speeding that up. For recertification, it's quite a bit quicker than that. And then for companies that are under $1 million, which they're calling their micro enterprise, those tend to be moving along, at a 5 to 6 month kind of time period as well. They're definitely moving those along a little bit more quickly. They're changing up the process a bit as we go. So just know that as you're going through the process, and you went through it before, know that it might be a little bit different. The rigor doesn't change, but the process sometimes is a little bit different, just so they can move folks through a little more efficiently than they have in the past. So just know that that's kind of a bit of a challenge right now. That's kind of the big thing that most of us consultants are dealing with and our clients are dealing with, is like, there's a lot backlog. The beauty is the movement's growing, it's growing rapidly, but it does create some consternation, and we have to be patient, which is hard to do right now in this world.
It is. And one of the things that I found interesting here too, that might touch on a couple of these questions before we dive in, is that the B impact assessment every 2 to 3 years historically has got a new version. We're on version 6, so V6, it's a nice and powerful engine. But so V7 in theory was slated to come at some point last year. And at this point, there will not be a new version until at least 2023 by the sounds of it. So don't worry, you might actually recertify using the same version of the assessment, which isn't something historically that has happened before if you certified in that last time frame. And Mike might have a little bit more insight into some of that, but that's the word trickling back from BLab, not super official, but certainly they're like, yeah, we aren't anywhere close to a new version of the assessment. And to BLab's credit, they really dropped a lot of what they were doing at the start of the pandemic in the first 6 months in particular to really facilitate and support the B Corp community. And that meant putting holds on a lot of recertifications, extending grace periods for recertifying times. So it put them really about a year behind schedule. And in some of that, they had a 700% increase in the amount of interest. So you put a backlog of recertifications and a front log of newly interested companies, you're going to end up with some longer timeframes. I will say that if you're a newly certifying company, if you push submit on your assessment and let us know at info@blocalpdx.com, which is also a place you should email if we don't get to your questions today. We'll be follow up with you after the conference. I can put that in the chat in a minute. But if you let us know at info@blocalpdx.com that you push submit on something, we'll treat you like a B Corp, just given that it's not your fault you haven't been certified yet. There's a lot of ways to get involved. So want to just make sure that that's out there, that these long times can really feel like a struggle because you're not able to market yourself as a B Corp, but we don't want to keep you and your employees from being a part of this community and feeling gatekept by that limit. I do see the first question in the chat here from Cassie about what is the best way to run what if scenarios in the BIA tool, i.e. if you change your responses to see what other questions open up and what areas are possible to improve in. And Mike, since I'm talking, I'm happy to just give what I've told folks in the past is one of the coolest things about the BIA is that nothing is set in stone when you're doing it. So as you're going through the process, you can set up, I've had customers tell me that they've set up 2 impact assessments, one that's actually their impact assessment and one that's kind of their dummy assessment where they could do a bunch of extra side work. And that may seem a little bit goofy, but it actually then, if they share the logins for these assessments where they can kind of see what's happening, there's the actual, like, we're writing this more in pen assessment and the other one that's more of a scratch pad. But I think the biggest thing to do on that side is to not be afraid to tinker a little bit. And before you push submit, when you get to the submit timeframe, like making sure all of your stakeholders are in agreement that you've documented everything that you're putting in. That way, if you do toggle around and open up some if-then gatekeeping, because that is something that happens, if you just answer no to a question, you're not going to get all of the follow-up questions that come from within that question. But the if-then side of things is if you say yes, it'll open up the next sliver of a yes/no, and then the next sliver and the next sliver sometimes. So don't be afraid to say, well, what if we did start measuring our carbon footprint? That's something we haven't done historically. Do you measure it at all? And then when I get into that, if you measure it at all, do you have a reduction strategy, right? So those are the types of things that to open it up is not a hard thing to do. And I recommend you do it just because that way it'll actually be tied to your impact business model. It'll be tied to your business type. Whereas if you just try to Google around it and see things that may not be tied to your business model. Mike, do you have anything about that to tie on to?
No, I think that's a really good point about, just trying to answer yes to some questions that may not be a yes today, just to see what the next set of questions that will come up. And typically, if you just keep answering, what I do is with a lot of my clients, I'll just say, answer yes, 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 and see what the options are. Because oftentimes you don't get those options to see, for instance, in particular in IBMs, a lot of folks that are going through the assessment the first time, they just say no to the first question, and then all of a sudden they don't see what the options are. And I see that a lot on the customer side. I've had somebody that was a media company that was doing a lot around kind of local musicians and so forth, and they were like, well, we're not really having an impact around environmental, and we're not doing really around community. And so in customer, they didn't really see that opportunity, and so they said no. And it wasn't until they got down further, actually working with local musicians is part of kind of arts and culture, and there is an IBM around that, and you have to be able to ask. But if you you're not going to get the points, because at some point it's going to be tied back to revenue and or something of that nature. So it's okay to answer yes to those questions. Doesn't freak B-Lab out. Ultimately, unless you're scoring those points, is the only time they're really going to go back and ask you to document it. So I think that's a great thing to do, is just to answer yes to questions if you want to test those out. You can also always, change your answers, back and forth to see what happens to my, the weighting will be at the bottom left-hand corner of that particular question. If you try out some different answers, you can see what the score is. But again, you're not probably driving this by what's my score, but people still want to know, am I getting closer to 80? Is this going to be a material change? So you can play with those a little bit, and it won't. Again, you can always go back to your original answer. Know that you can keep changing your answers really until B-Lab locks you down, and that's not until you hit the verification point. So another little aside is I oftentimes will encourage clients, once they get to 80 points, to submit, get in the queue, And then let's keep working at it, particularly if you're a first time, because it's going to be another 6 months. So we can keep plugging away at the actions and making sure that our documentation is together, but get in the queue soon. So that would be that's another thought there. Gosh, Craig, there was something else you said a minute ago that I really wanted to respond to, but I'm sure it'll come up to me later.
Maybe if my voice will just trigger some part of dark repressed part of your memory. I would also say at this side that one of the theories that people have found most helpful when I've talked to them is to be thinking about like a stoplight theory when what questions to answer yes to, breaking down all of your remaining points. So let's say you have 85 points and you really want to get to 90 for your recertification, or you're at 60 and you really want to get to 80 to certify. Be thinking like stoplight theory, red, yellow, green. Like you could look at your remaining points of those 140 if you have 60 points and just say which ones of these are just no-goes that we can't proceed forward with. It's okay to just say you can't get 200 points, so stop trying. To just think about like there's going to be a certain subset of points that could be, 40 points, it could be 80 points. You're like, you could give me a ton of money, a ton of resources, and a ton of time, and we just can't do this. And then the green ones are like, no, we're going to do that. I really want to do that. But the yellow ones, the kind of start stop that could be hard to see whether or not you want to do them now versus later. That kind of if then screening is really helpful. Go down some of those roads and see how many points they open up for you, because maybe 8 points is an easier squeeze in this area, relative to the amount of work than 4 points would be somewhere else, even if you really want to do them. So I think sometimes that's helpful to not be afraid of the process, to give yourself a chance to go down some of those roads and answer, yeah, no, I think we could do that. We could do that. And if you start going being like, man, that only opened up like 0.5 points for us to do like 6 things, maybe that's not the thing for right now. And we'll focus on some other areas and get some more juice from that squeeze.
And I know Julie just put in a question in there too. And I know there's a whole bunch more, Adrian, you want to get to, but just since I don't lose it. So there isn't a great way to kind of scratch, kind of copy your assessment into another BIA, the actual platform. But there is if you download the assessment through the question filter, you can, in a couple of other places, you can put it into into an Excel document. And what I typically do is with clients, I'll kind of resort the current answers by points that are remaining. So you can just add another little column there. You take what the points are available, points you got, points that are remaining, add that column, do your little formula. And then you can see kind of what are the most material opportunities that are there before you. As Craig said, cross those out that are just not relevant. We're not going to be a company owned, employee owned business, for the next couple of years. So let's just take that off. But it's a great way for us to really focus on, what are the most material opportunities and what are the most relevant to you, and then build from there. I usually build those back into the goal setting within the BIA, and we can take a look at that. At any point, if we want to, we can also go into I can pull up a BA and we can take a look at it, see what those opportunities are. And
catching on Kristen and Michelle's comments in the chat over here, the question type comments, is that I think the best time to start working on recertification is before you've actually been certified. There's just an element of this. If you're thinking about it and putting it in a drawer for 35 months after getting certified until you're getting recertified, you're really going to put yourself in a hole. The same way that you do budget forecasting, most companies do. They set up something they're thinking about, all right, for 2022, we really want to accomplish these fiscal guidelines. Think about BIA points that were in your yellow category for yourself before you certified. And say, if we couldn't do that right now, but if you gave me 12 months and we actually set up quarterly checkpoints for ourselves to do something, your score is kind of like, I've used this analogy a lot. So if you've talked to me before, you may have heard it. I kind of liken it to your SAT score. It may have been important to get into college, but if all you do is talk about your score after you get into college, people are like, yeah, okay, you're kind of a dick. Like, we're all in college together now. Okay, everybody, like, we all got here together. Your score is great. We're all B Corp. So I think that some of that is important to remember, that like getting your score up when you recertify could definitely be a great aspiration. But if you are trying to just base whether or not to do something on whether or not it's going to raise your score, I kind of shrug at some of that to say, well, then do it in between your next certification. And then that way you're not creating a crunch for yourself. Identify the things you want to do and have some stakeholder responsibilities in addition to just profit responsibilities in some of your forecasting and budgets. It allows you to set some good goals that aren't just about money.
A couple of things I remembered. One of the things I wanted to talk about is Craig was talking about the new assessment that's coming up, and this is something. This will also tie to kind of recertification, and for folks that are going through the first time, you're probably not going to be relevant to you. But once that new one comes out, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on this, but I think there's going to be 2 new prescriptions. The only one you have now for certification is that you adopt whatever the legal entity is within the state. In our case, is either LLC operating, with some new language in your operating agreement, stakeholder language, or in the case of a C Corp or S Corp is adopting the benefit corporation status within the state of Oregon. That's the only prescription right now. Going forward, BLAB they're getting pretty clear about saying you're not going to get certified if you don't have a climate action plan, right? And I likely adopted the net zero by 2050. The second one is that if you don't have a JEDI plan, even though there's plenty of questions in there around that, if you don't have a diversity, equity, inclusion, justice plan, and operating against that, likely not going to get certified. So those are just some things to be thinking about going forward when you're thinking about what is my continuous improvement plan. Those are the two areas that you want to make sure, even if you're a service company on the climate stuff, you can still take action there, and it's not that hard to do.
If y'all are already doing the B impact assessment, this may feel kind of surplus to arms, but I'm going to put in the chat over here the SDG Global Action Manager over here with BLAB that they partnered with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They're a great way to kind of break down by the 17 different SDGs, which areas of kind of questions within the B impact assessment kind of tie into those, and other ways that you can have better starting points. So if there's certain areas on the assessment you feel like you're totally you don't even know where to begin, but you want to start looking at those, sometimes working backwards from the SDG, like Global Action Manager one, is kind of a good way to start, because you could say we really care about, aquatic life. That's something that's really important to us, is healthy oceans, but we don't really know how to lean into that. Or poll your employees, poll your folks who are working in it, or poll your customers of which areas would you like to see us make the most improvements over the next few years. Give your stakeholders a chance to have a say in some different areas, and then that will tie it back in certain ways to questions that might be asked in the BIA that tie into doing a better job in those areas, or kind of point you towards new ways you could have impacts that you can then capture in part of your business impact model, or your impact business model, or in some other areas that BLAB does ascribe some kind of freelance points, and Mike might be able to talk about this, that kind of aren't captured in any specific area, but you document. They could be like, well, that's actually checking a couple of these boxes you didn't check for yourself. Mike, I know that's something it's hard to quantify those because you already have to have 80 points to push submit. But there are times people push submit and end up with higher scores than they push submit on because they were too hard on themselves, or not giving themselves credit in certain ways for areas they do that do have impact.
Yeah. Sorry, I got distracted here. I guess we're doing, as you can see behind me, we've got a garage sale getting ready to go on here at the Grange, is where I'm working out of. So we got folks walking in and out, but I'm good. Hey, one thing, and I'm not answering that question. Sorry, Craig. I know it's there is the NA section on your assessment, and you can look in your dashboard where where those NA points come from. Those typically, when you're answering not applicable to me, those points get reallocated to other areas.
Yeah.
Julie brought up a question around the 25th, the climate action plan, that getting to net zero by 2050 versus 2030. 2030 is what BLAB is really pushing companies to go towards, and that's what you'll see in the Climate Collective. A lot of B Corps are now adopting the net zero by 2030. Again, a lot easier for companies that are service than they are for production companies. But it is key that you're kind of getting halfway there by 2030 or 2035. But the science-based target is 2050, is what IPCC is saying. We got to get to net zero by 2050. So that's the science-based target that the assessment will probably use going forward.
And definitely want to plug some of our ABC groups. They've been a little bit dormant during COVID, but there will be some relaunching happening in 2022. And one of the ones that people are most excited about in general is carbon tracking, that area of net neutral by the global, we had that climate summit that BLAB helped put on, that was facilitated by former board member Karen Lichtag here in Portland. And those are one of those ways to really stay plugged in with other companies that are reaching to be carbon neutral by 2030. Just in general, if you're trying to stay plugged in, there'll be an ABC group for B Corps to communicate with other B Corps who are putting climate action plans together. So you can kind of crib notes off each other, because this isn't meant to be a trade secret. There are ways that we could do this together, and we want to be stronger together as a community, and ways that we could de-risk something, or somebody could show that we put this in and it really wasn't that hard and it actually had an outsized impact. We want people to adopt that quickly, rather than try to have a hard time hearing about those things. So while the BIA may suggest areas and things that you do, sometimes there's ways you could, crib off your other B Corp folks in your industry or not, that usually are more than happy to share, and we'd be happy to be a facilitation point for that at Be Local.
That's a great idea. It's just talking with other folks that are in the industry. I have a brewery client right now, and we're looking at some IBMs that we think impact business model kind of around innovative practices. And so we're going to have a conversation with another brewery that we already know is a B Corp, and and B Corps love to be able to share with other B Corps. There's a great camaraderie in that respect. So definitely reach out to other folks that might be similar to your, using a similar BIA, kind of in the same sector, kind of similar size and so forth. Another question that came up was around, Julie asked around, wait to hit 85 points. And I think under normal circumstances, before you hit submit, and I usually I tell all my clients, we got to get to at least 85 before we get to verification. So I would say when you get to 80, that allows you to submit. So you won't actually be able to submit until you hit 80, but get in the queue. Keep working, get to that 85 plus points, because those extra points are helpful when you go through verification. So you've got a little cushion if you lose one here or there and you gain one here or there, but it is great to have that cushion. So B-Lab will tell you to, yes, wait till 85. I tell my clients, as soon as it's 80, push the button, get it done, and get in line, because we can keep working for the next 5 months or more.
Like somebody hopped out the car to get in line for a busy restaurant kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like by the time you get there, everyone will have parked and hopped in line with you. I will say too, on some of this, for some of the problems in the queue for how long it is are people pushing submit and they're not ready at all. Yeah. They haven't done any of the work. They queued up, oh, it'll take 6 months, we'll be ready to go. Sure, we did it. And then they're like, oh, I had to document things. Oh, I had to do some other pieces. So just know that the queue is not all filled necessarily with people who are attending sessions like this and feeling very prepared. If you do feel like you could accurately document everything that you said in your assessment, the chances of you getting assessed go up pretty dramatically, versus folks who I could tell a story of why we're a B Corp, is you're going to have a bad time. So a lot of the time, those folks there's a comment in here, it's a whole lot harder for folks to say, oh crap, I'm having, this is really hard. I feel like I have to document to the nth degree everything that we're doing. It's that's the best practice, as well you should, but you're less likely to be exposed to one of those, we had 90 points and now we're down to 40 type thing that other folks have. There's definitely been some mad folks in the Be Local inbox before who've been like, we thought we were a shoe-in for this side, and they finally got to us and they told us we had to document everything. I had no idea. And it's well, you knew we existed and we would have told you you had to document it. So I would say, but to not be afraid at some point to not let perfect be the enemy of good. We talked, there was some of that context that was given in one of the breakout sessions yesterday, that perfectionism is actually a white supremacy trait, that we're all working for these companies in ways that we're trying to improve constantly, that kind of Kaizen level of constant improvement. And the B impact assessment is really forcing that. It's a point in time. You're getting assessed at that point in time. You're going to have to do it again in 3 years. So focus on what you could do now, make those improvements, and be happy that you could do them. And then keep setting goals that are a little bit higher for yourself all the time. Lucky Julie, that's better. That's for Australia, it's queuing shorter.
What I was going to say too, and I think this will probably happen in Australia as well. B-Lab has instituted a submission fee as one of the ways to weed out companies, or an employee just goes through the assessment, says, "Great, we look at all these things we're going to do," and then push the button for submit, and they're not really all that interested in going through certification, or they really haven't run it up the chain, to make sure that everybody else does. So that's one of the problems with this assessment. When it was free, it was a great tool for people to be able to use, but folks were submitting, and then that was gumming up the system. So they have instituted, I think it's just a flat $150 fee. I know it's here in the US, and I think it's in a couple of other countries. Not sure if that's in Australia or not yet, but just know that you'll pay that $150. I don't think that's required for recertification. I know it's for sure for new submissions. Other thing I would just suggest is as you think about the things that you want to have nailed down, probably even before you submit. And I usually encourage people to actually put this into, I generally don't fill in a lot of documentation into the little, at the bottom of every question, there's an opportunity to make comment or upload a document. I generally don't ask people to use that a lot before they submit. But one thing you can do is all your IBMs should be documented. So for instance, whatever your your legal entity, if you've got a new operating agreement, that should be uploaded in the mission lock piece right away. If you've got IBMs, particularly on the either giving side in your community or in the environmental side around, let's just say it's toxic reduction related to organic, those you should document and probably have that documentation and there's some really great resources, and I'll let everybody know at the bottom of your assessment, I don't have to, but once you're logged in at the very bottom of your assessment, there's a little link called resource or knowledge base. And I don't know why they make it so hard to find, but it actually is there at the very bottom. It's like in the small print with a lot of websites. You go like, I don't even get to the bottom. But knowledge base is a great place to be able to type in, get answers to almost any question you have. And then if you can't get an answer to that question, then you can kind of submit something to BLab, a question. The other thing I would say is if you do certify at bcorporation.net, so if you actually are in the process of going through certification or you've got a really specific question, certify at bcorporation.net is a better email to use than what's the other one, Craig? What's the other one is support at bcorporation.net. So that one is kind of like a general, it's not going to help you a lot, but the certify at bcorp.net is really a much better path to follow.
Yeah, support is more of like technological support and like, I don't know what a B Corp is and trying to connect you to resources versus answering specific questions related to certification. And I would also just plug, and maybe Mike's too humble to do it over here, like there are people you can pay and their fees are not exorbitant compared to the cost of certification who can assist in your certification process. They could be a project manager, they can scope their work to support you all. They don't just have like a package and it's like, oh, this is just what I do and sorry. If it doesn't fit your bucket, a lot of the time they're experts who are on your team. Like if you are instituting a new IT platform at your company or a new cloud system, you hire a cloud consultant on occasion, you hire somebody to come in who are helping with your company. If this is something you're setting up your company to be more sustainable, attract better talent, retain the talent you have, attract new customers, it's an investment and there is a monetary cost to some of that. And if there's a way you can do it better and save your team time in the long run, because your time is not free, having some certification support folks, Mike's incredible. We know other folks in the footprint like Carolina Miranda of Cultivating Capital down the Bay Area is really terrific. They have offices up here in Portland. There's some other non-B Corp certified folks who could support in that process as well. And as some of you might have heard earlier, the Gen Z comment that it's a B Impact PSU, that I wouldn't recommend them if you're trying to like have experts in certification the same way as a certification expert like Mike would be. But there are certain ways that they could partner with you to add bandwidth to your team if you're trying to develop a new procurement policy. There are MBA candidates who might be able to help with something like that, or redraft your operating agreement to fit the new impact business models. Those are areas they could really help. If it's like, well, just I need 20 points, get it for me, is not as helpful as like somebody like Mike, who you're paying to say, you could look at everything with my company and help me figure out how to do that. And again, just to not be afraid of that.
So, and Adrian, I don't know if you want us just to kind of do this as we've been just kind of pulling questions up here, unless you wanted to throw those out.
Great.
But okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've answered many of the questions that have come through. There's the question, do you have a recommendation for finding a, we talked about the peer matches.
Yeah.
Like finding peer to connect with. I wonder, if Cassie, maybe even you wanted to tell us more, maybe there's someone here in this group.
I'll take a first stab at it, and then Cassie or anybody else that's got a thought is so, because I use this a lot with clients. It's first just to go to, if you go to bcorporation.net and you look at the directory, and you can look up by sector, by country, and really get a better in company size. And what I'll try to do is, so for instance, if I've got, like I've just brought up the brewery client before, or I've got a coffee client now too, and there's a whole bunch of coffee companies out there, and I want to see how they're scoring, number one. So it's great for me just to say, okay, we're at 82. These other companies, all, these are that I've seen are 85 or 95. And so you can, and then when you push on their actual score, you can get a breakdown of how within each sector. So within the environmental score, I can see how they did. They actually get some IBM points for toxic reduction, or maybe they got some IBM points around fair trade or direct trade practices. So oftentimes I can see how they did score, and then, okay, great, that's an area that's a weakness for us, we want to build on. I'll reach out to them, and and usually have to do a little bit of search because you're not going to be able to get the contact person over there from B Lab, but usually it's not that hard to find somebody over there if you just do a reach out through their info, or I usually just look somebody up on the website, say sustainability director, or if they're that large, or just somebody within the LinkedIn, however you want to pursue it, and then reach out to them and just have a conversation about what they're doing in those areas. And it's a great way to find out what their practices were that earned them those points, and having those kinds of impacts. So I think that's a great approach. Is just to use the B Corporation directory is a great way to see who's out there.
It's really slow. It's pulling a lot of data, and I've had some conversations with B Lab that they're basically going to go back to the drawing board by Q1 of next year to have an entirely redesigned directory that makes it easier to search and navigate. If you know of some companies, sometimes if you're trying to go through this so you know who they are, you can Google any B Corp company and just put B Corp afterward, and usually the very first result will either be their page that's talking about their B Corp certification, and sometimes even a contact link at that company to talk about B Corp certification. A lot of companies do that, or their B Corp score on the B Impact website for the bcorporation.net. So if you're having a hard time, you're trying to look somebody up and it's just taking forever, you don't know where they're headquartered or where they're certified out of. It's like, oh, I want to look up Stumptown Coffee. Like, just search Stumptown Coffee B Corp on Google rather than using the directory. You'll probably have a better time. And they might actually have some other resources of folks to contact at those companies. I liken it, I use Duolingo every day. I don't know if anybody's like language nerd type, where you just like sit and practice a little bit of language every day. If I never speak it, it doesn't really help me that much. It certainly helps from a vocabulary perspective and like retention of knowledge. It's similar like that with B Corp certification work. For a lot of folks work on it and they work really hard and they build this skill set to speak this kind of language, and then they don't get to talk about it very much after it certifies. It kind of sits in a drawer. They don't have anyone to talk about it with anymore. You're going to find most folks are pretty excited at those companies to share their time with you, especially with COVID and a lot of adoption of virtual conferencing and discussions. It doesn't really matter where you are, as long as you can find a coordinate time that works. I think it's a pretty cool way to stay connected with other folks and build your community. A lot of collaboration, not competition in those spaces. And maybe you'll find a new collaboration, right? Like your brewery clients, like I'd like to see them brew a beer together, like over shared values or something. That does happen, where people, some of the wineries down in Dayton, in Yamhill County down there, have done some wine cuvées together, sharing grapes after B Corp certification things. I think are super cool. They get to know each other, and there's areas that some folks do better than others, even if you're in the same industry, and can collaborate to make something better. That's part of this whole ethos and spirit in the first place.
Great. I think we probably have time for one last question. So I was looking through the question queue, or if there's one more question that someone wants to submit, we can take that right now.
And if nobody has one, I'll jump back to a prior question and expand on it, but I'll wait 30 seconds or 20 seconds. Or we'll just shift as we go. But when somebody said there was a question around like, how soon should we start for recertification? And Craig said, before you certify the first time, but you're going to also think about, what I usually encourage a client at the very end, after we've submitted, after we've got certification, after we've started to announce and celebrate, is to go back and do two things in the assessment. One is repull your assessment using that Excel, resort it, see what the opportunities are based on how you did. Like, there's still some opportunities, and then try to find which of those are really relevant to your business and where you're trying to go as an organization. So that Excel document becomes really helpful. And again, you can replace those back into your goals, and then give yourself goals, and you can do anywhere from 6 months to over a year. So start working on that. The other thing I usually encourage folks to do, and I do this both during the assessment process, as we're kind of going through sort of getting ready for certification, but then also afterward, is, look at the report, and you can see this in a couple of different places in the assessment, and it breaks down just kind of you're essentially, you'll say view report. It's actually on your dashboard, and you click on each section, your governance section, your worker section, community, and it'll break down how you're doing versus all B Corps how you're doing against B Corps in your sector, and then how you're doing against others that have completed the assessment, but who may or may not be a B Corp. So it's really helpful just to see kind of where you are, where you're maybe falling, maybe not falling behind, but you haven't put as much effort into a particular set of actions as maybe some of the other peers within your industry. And I find that sometimes helpful to be able to go back to the client and say, okay, now that we've done this, here's a clear opportunity for us to make some changes going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. We have one last question that came through. If you have any recommendations for larger companies, and while you're answering that, if I could have Craig and Mike throw their contact information or the best way to get in touch with any additional questions, that would be great. If you guys can put it in the chat, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say work with a B Corp consultant. Largely, y'all, I would say the biggest things that are supported is to create a team at any company. If you have more than one person working at your company, if you have 10 people, 2 or 3 people might self-select into being on the B Corp team. If you have 20 or 30, it might be 3 to 5 folks. If you have 50 to 60, you might have more in different areas. Don't be afraid to share the load. There's a lot of great resources you could trot this road together. I usually think someone in human capital, human resources is a great resource. Someone in finance, somebody who understands your books, somebody who's probably a green team or diversity, equity, inclusion team you might have at your company. Those are all folks you want to have some representative of those teams. If you have 200 to 300 people in your company, chances are you have several of these initiatives. You've got 5 to 10 people in each department of those. You could ask each department to pick a person from each of those departments and start building a team that it lives with. That way, if you have turnover after you certify or during your recertification process, 1 or 2 people leaving a team of 5 or 8, you can put some new culture in, send them to some B101s that we do at B Local, something to kind of get them up to speed of the general community. But then you could really restock that team with the bench rather than having one person leave and your entire process is sidelined.
I concur with Craig, and it's a great way to build commitment to the process going forward, and understanding of what those opportunities are. So I think it's is build. If you've got the resources, and you've got the number of folks, bring them in. It's kind of like oh gosh, what from Eco Trust the other day that was speaking. It was kind of just talking about really engaging the whole community.
Jeremy Barnacle,
yeah, Jeremy Barnacle, and kind of engaging their entire workforce, or at least across the workforce, having folks participate really makes a difference. Key thing there is just make sure that not everybody is answering. You really define who's answering what questions, so when there's changes made, you kind of know who's making those changes to the assessment. Because I've seen that where too many cooks in the kitchen can also be problematic if you're not organized.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. We are at time. I want to let everyone know I'm putting the link back to the main session in the chat for you, and saying thank you so much, Craig. Thank you, Mike. Their contact information, as well as some other resources, are in the chat, and there'll be a recording of the session later for you if you want to refer back to it as well. Enjoy the end of the conference, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for the facilitation. Thanks for participating. Looking forward to seeing you all around the community. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye. Good luck.